This video goes through quality assurance in qualitative research based on approaches. So the material for this video are taken from Patton and his book, Qualitative Research and Evaluation Methods, Integrating Theory and Practice, fourth edition, which was published in 2015, and in particular, pages 979 to 980. And the other reference that is important to read is by Reynolds et al. And other authors, titled Quality Assurance of Qualitative Research, a review of the discourse, which was published in 2011. And you've got the DOI number on the slide to refer to. So both of these resources discuss a review that Reynolds and the other researchers did. And the review, this review really was about trying to see what quality assurance and criteria did researchers use in general in their qualitative research. So the review concluded that these fell into two main groups. One is output-oriented approach, and the other type of quality assurance and criteria fell into what they called process-oriented approach, or a process-oriented approach. So two groups, output-oriented approach and a process-oriented approach. So an output-oriented approach, what does that follow? That typically follow and uses quality criteria like, for example, triangulation, member validation / checks, peer review of findings, deviant or negative case analysis, and multiple coders. This approach also typically follows a positivist philosophy, and I won't be going into what positivist philosophy mean. You could read that, and it's not really covered in this video. But in general, it's important to know that this approach typically really follow a positivist philosophy. This approach also has, as is the case, has strengths and weaknesses, in that following checklists does not equate to an understanding of the theoretical underpinnings of qualitative research. So this is something to keep in mind if you are following an output-oriented approach. That involves any of these typically used, criteria like, as I mentioned, triangulation, member validation, the use of multiple coders to verify findings, peer review of findings, negative case analysis, and so on. In contrast, a process-oriented approach, the second group, derives quality assurance from the values or principles considered inherent in qualitative approaches. So these principles typically include reflexivity of the researcher's position, assumptions and practice, transparency of decisions made and assumptions held, comprehension of the approach to the research question, responsibility towards decision-making acknowledged by the researcher, upholding good ethical practice throughout the research, and a systematic approach to designing, conducting, and analyzing a study. So, for example, in my PhD, you could say that mine followed a process-oriented approach. I did a qualitative study. Why was that the case? Because I followed most of these principles really, and during the research. I was very reflexive as a researcher in terms of my position, my assumptions, and my practices. When I did my PhD, I was transparent in terms of the decision I made and the assumptions I held, whether in notes or, in the thesis itself. It was also, I used, you could say, a comprehensive approach to the research question, backed up by the literature review that I've done. And as a result, and derived from the literature review and the comprehensive literature review that I've done. And also, I was responsible really towards the decision making of my research, and I acknowledge that. I also upheld good, ethical practice throughout the research, and I documented these in my thesis. And I also followed a systematic approach to the design, the way that I conducted and analyzed the study, and I followed in the way that I followed an audit trail, for example, when I did my analysis of the data. So what Patton really mentions in relation to the process-oriented approach is that these have got strengths. So the strengths of this approach is really that it includes the ability of the researcher to address the quality of their research in relation to the core principles or values of qualitative research. The core principles identified in this text also represent, continuous researcher-led activities rather than externally determined indicators such as validity or endpoints. So it's really a researcher-led process, which makes it harder, more lengthy compared to maybe indicators and the more of the output-oriented approach, if you like, because you always have to, as a researcher doing this kind of qualitative research, you're always having to go back, check, recheck, go back to your audit trail, reflect about your position, your decision making, be transparent about all the decisions that you are making, and so on. So there are strengths to this method. Also, Patton mentions that reflexivity, for example, so he gives the example of reflexivity to make this point, is an active, iterative process. It is an attitude of attending systematically to the context of knowledge construction at every step of the research process. So as such, these kind of things, these make this process-oriented approach. In this process-oriented approach, we emphasize the need to consider quality throughout the whole course of research and locate the responsibility for enacting good qualitative research practice firmly in the lab of the researchers. And this you could, again, check in page 980 of Patton's book, as well as the article by Reynolds and the other authors where they go through this review of quality assurance and criteria, and they talk more about these two groups of output-oriented approach and the process-oriented approach.